The sky bled crimson over Rattlesnake Ridge as Yates Galloway's voice cut through the saloon like a razor, sharp enough to make even the grizzled prospectors flinch into their whiskey glasses. It was 1879 in the Arizona Territory, and mercy was as scarce as rainfall. "I said move aside," Yates drawled, each word a calculated strike. His lean frame cast a long shadow across the weathered floorboards, spurs jingling with deadly promise. "Unless you're fixing to meet your maker today." The miner blocking his path, a burly man with dirt so embedded in his skin it looked permanent, stumbled back, mumbling apologies. This was how Yates had survived for 30 years in a land that devoured men whole. His reputation as the meanest gun hand between Tucson and El Paso hadn't come by accident. Yates claimed his usual corner table, back to the wall, eyes on the door. His fingers, calloused from years of rope and reins, drummed impatiently on the scarred wood. The broken spoke wasn't much, just another dusty watering hole in a territory overflowing with them, but it served whiskey strong enough to burn away memories, which was all Yates required. "Your usual, Mr. Galloway." The barkeep didn't wait for a response, already pouring the amber liquid. Yates nodded curtly. Words were ammunition, and he never wasted bullets. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of desert heat and the silhouette of a woman Yates had never seen before. He assessed her with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to identifying threats. She stood tall, dressed practically in a traveling outfit that had seen better days. Her auburn hair was tied back sensibly, though rebellious strands escaped around her face. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, clear, determined, and utterly fearless as they surveyed the room. The usual hush that followed a woman's entrance into these male domains settled over the saloon, broken only by the pianist's faltering notes. She approached the bar with purposeful strides. "I'm looking for information about stagecoach routes to Prescott," she stated, her voice carrying the refined edges of an Eastern education, yet firm with resolve. The barkeep's eyebrows rose. "Madam, the stage office would be closed until Monday. Yes, I'm aware." She placed coins on the counter. "I was told this establishment might offer more immediate answers." Yates watched as the men around her exchanged glances, sizing up this stranger who clearly didn't understand the dangers of a place like Rattlesnake Ridge. A woman alone asking questions invited trouble. He should mind his business, he always did. Yet something in her bearing, in the stubborn tilt of her chin, kept his attention fixed. "Ain't no stage going to Prescott until Tuesday now," called out a voice from near the card tables. "Roads washed out past Devil's Canyon." The woman's shoulders stiffened. "That's impossible. I must reach Prescott by Sunday." "Nothing's impossible, just costly," another man suggested, rising from his chair. Dawson, one of the local cattle hands with a reputation for meanness. "I could arrange private transportation for the right. Compensation." The implication hung heavy in the air. Yates watched the woman's face, expecting fear or distress. Instead, a sound so unexpected it nearly made him spill his whiskey filled the room laughter. Not nervous tittering, but genuine, rich amusement that creased the corners of her eyes. "Sir," she said when her laughter subsided, "I believe that was the least subtle proposition I've encountered since leaving Boston. I must decline." The saloon fell silent. Nobody laughed at Dawson. Certainly not a woman alone in a town where the law was whatever men with guns decided it was that day. Dawson's face darkened as he moved toward her. "Don't recall giving you a choice, miss." Yates didn't remember deciding to stand. His chair scraped against the floor as he rose, hand resting casually near his holster. "The lady declined," he said, words clipped and cold. "Might want to remember your manners, Dawson." All eyes turned to him, including hers. There wasn't gratitude in her gaze, more like curiosity mixed with assessment, as if he were a mathematical equation she was attempting to solve. "This ain't your business, Galloway," Dawson snarled, though he didn't advance further. "It is now." Yates took a deliberate sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. The threat wasn't in his words, but in the reputation that followed them. Dawson hesitated, then spat on the floor. "Ain't worth my time anyway." He retreated to his table, muttering curses. The woman watched this exchange with unnerving composure before turning to Yates. "Thank you for your intervention, though I had the situation well in hand. Laughing at a man like Dawson isn't having things in hand. It's writing checks your guns can't cash." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. "And yet," she replied, approaching his table with unexpected confidence, "it appears to have worked. I'm Beatrice Keller." She extended her hand like she expected him to shake it, as if they were meeting at some fancy Eastern social gathering rather than a frontier saloon where blood had been spilled more often than whiskey. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. "Yates Galloway. May I join you, Mr. Galloway? It seems we have business to discuss." Without waiting for permission, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. "I don't recall us having any business," Yates said, discomfited by her forwardness. "We do now. I need to reach Prescott by Sunday, and you appear to be a man who knows how to navigate difficult situations." Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "I'm willing to pay generously for an escort. I'm not for hire. Everyone's for hire at the right price. I'm offering $300. Yates couldn't hide his surprise. That was nearly 6 months' wages for a working cowhand. "What's in Prescott that's worth that kind of money?" "My sister's wedding. I promised to be there." Something flickered in her eyes, vulnerability quickly masked. "Family is the only promise worth keeping in this world, wouldn't you agree?" He wouldn't, actually. In his experience, family promises were the first to be broken. But $300 would buy a lot of future, maybe enough to finally purchase that small ranch he'd been eyeing up near the Northern Territories. Somewhere quiet, away from guns and reputations. "It's a 4-day ride through Apache territory," he said, considering. "Rough country." "I'm tougher than I look," Beatrice responded, "and apparently so is my sense of humor." There it was again, that unexpected spark of wit that seemed so at odds with her proper appearance. Yates found himself struggling not to smile, an unfamiliar sensation. "We'd leave at dawn," he said finally. "No guarantees we make it in time or at all." "I'll take those odds, Mr. Galloway." She stood, smoothing her travel-worn skirt. "Where shall I meet you?" "Livery stable, east end of town." He finished his whiskey. "Pack light, bring water." Beatrice nodded. "All business now, until dawn then." As she turned to leave, Yates found himself adding, "And Miss Keller, leave the laughing behind. It won't serve you well where we're going." She paused at the door, silhouetted against the fading daylight. "On the contrary, Mr. Galloway. I've found laughter serves me precisely when nothing else will." The doors swung shut behind her, leaving Yates with the uncomfortable sensation that he'd just agreed to more than a simple escort job. The barkeep brought another whiskey without being asked. "That's a mighty peculiar woman," he observed. Yates grunted in agreement. "Peculiar indeed, and heading straight for trouble with that laughing mouth of hers." But for $300, he'd see her safely to Prescott. After that, she was someone else's problem. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers of light over the eastern horizon as Yates checked the cinch on his sturdy buckskin gelding. The air carried the promise of another scorching day, typical for late summer in the territory. He'd spent the night gathering supplies, planning routes, and wondering if the Eastern woman would actually appear. To his surprise, Beatrice Keller arrived at the livery stable precisely as the first ray of sunlight touched the weathered sign. More surprising still was her attire. Gone was the traveling dress, replaced by practical riding clothes, split skirt, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. A rifle was securely strapped to her saddle, alongside well-packed saddlebags. "You know how to use that?" Yates nodded toward the rifle. "I wouldn't carry it if I didn't," she replied, checking her mare's bridle with competent hands. "My father believed all his children should be proficient with firearms, regardless of gender. Progressive man. Practical man. The war left him with few illusions about security." She mounted her horse with practiced ease. "Shall we proceed?" Yates swung into his saddle, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. "We'll follow the creek bed until noon, then cut northwest through the pass. Less chance of running into trouble that way." "By trouble, I assume you mean both natural dangers and the human variety. Both bite equally hard out here." They rode in silence as the town fell behind them, the landscape opening into vast stretches of scrubland dotted with sagebrush and mesquite. The mountains loomed ahead, purple shadows against the brightening sky. Yates kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, old habits impossible to break. After an hour, Beatrice broke the silence. "You don't speak much, do you, Mr. Galloway?" "Don't see the point in talking when there's nothing to say. Some might argue conversation is what separates us from less civilized creatures." Yates adjusted his hat. "Out here, talking can get you killed. Sound carries, attracts attention." "Is that why you've cultivated such a sharp manner of speaking when you do choose to use your voice? I noticed how the men in the saloon reacted to you. Your words seem to cut like knives." He glanced at her, irritated by her perception. "A man cultivates whatever keeps him alive. And has it kept you alive, so far?" He guided his horse around a patch of prickly pear. "What about you? Most women I know don't laugh in the face of men like Dawson." "Perhaps you know the wrong women," she replied with a small smile, "or perhaps laughter is my knife." The notion was so unexpected that Yates nearly laughed himself. Strange weapon, but effective. When people expect tears or fear, laughter disarms them. "It's served me well since I was a girl." Yates considered this as they rode. He'd never thought of laughter as anything but a luxury one he'd largely denied himself over the years. His weapons had always been more tangible. His Colt revolver, his sharply honed words, his willingness to do violence when necessary. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. They stopped in the shade of a limestone outcropping, watering the horses from a shallow spring. Beatrice dismounted gracefully, stretching her back before retrieving bread and dried meat from her saddlebags. "You ride well," Yates observed, accepting the food she offered. "Not what I expected." From a Boston woman, she sat on a flat rock, arranging her skirt. "My mother's family owned a horse farm in Virginia before the war. Summers there were my greatest joy as a child." "What brought you west?" "My sister Elizabeth married a mining engineer. They settled in Prescott last year." She took a drink from her canteen. "And you, have you always been in the territories?" Yates hesitated, unused to sharing personal details. "Texas originally, came west after the war, fighting for Confederate cavalry, not something I'm proud of anymore." She nodded, neither condemning nor excusing. "The war drew many moral lines. My father fought for the Union, lost an arm at Antietam. He said the greatest casualty was our national innocence." "Your father sounds like a philosopher." "He was a clockmaker. Said it gave him perspective on time and consequences." She brushed crumbs from her lap. "Is that how you acquired your reputation during the war?" Yates stiffened. "My reputation? The men in that saloon feared you without you even raising your voice. That kind of fear isn't born overnight." He secured his canteen, avoiding her gaze. "We should move, still have ground to cover before nightfall." To his relief, she didn't press further. They mounted and continued their journey, the terrain gradually becoming rockier as they approached the foothills. Yates found himself stealing glances at his companion, intrigued despite himself by the contradictions she embodied: Eastern refinement paired with frontier adaptability, proper manners with unexpected boldness. Late afternoon found them navigating a narrow trail that wound through a canyon of red rock. Yates raised his hand suddenly, signaling a halt. "What is it?" Beatrice whispered, instantly alert. He pointed silently to the rocky ledge above them where dust had been disturbed in a pattern too regular for wind. His hand moved to his holster as he scanned their surroundings with practiced eyes. "When I give the word," he said quietly, "ride hard, don't look back." Before she could respond, a shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. Yates's horse reared as rock fragments exploded near its hooves. Drawing his pistol in one fluid motion, Yates fired toward the ridge. "Go!" he shouted, wheeling his mount to provide cover. Instead of fleeing, Beatrice pulled her rifle from its scabbard and took aim at the ridge. Her shot was remarkably precise, striking near where the ambusher was positioned. A yelp of surprise echoed through the canyon. "I said go," Yates growled, "firing again, and leave you outnumbered." "That's poor strategy," she replied. Chambering another round, two more riders appeared at the canyon entrance behind them, cutting off retreat. Yates assessed their situation with cold clarity. They were trapped, outgunned. These weren't Apache, their methods were different. Road agents, most likely, drawn by the prospect of lone travelers. 4 of them, 2 of us, he muttered, guiding his horse closer to hers. Not good odds. To his astonishment, Beatrice smiled. Then let's change the calculation. Before he could stop her, she called out in a clear, carrying voice. Gentlemen, a moment of your time. The gunfire paused momentarily, confusion evident in the stillness that followed. We're carrying little of value, she continued. Certainly nothing worth bloodshed. However, we do have information that might interest you. What game are you playing? Yates hissed. She ignored him. Army payroll wagon traveling with minimal escort left Tucson yesterday morning, heading north. A voice called from the ridge. Why should we believe you? Because I have the Army dispatch in my saddlebag. My brother-in-law works for the paymaster's office. You're welcome to see it and then decide if we're worth your bullets. Yates stared at her, incredulous. Either she was the most convincing liar he'd ever met, or she was revealing information that could get her arrested for treason. After a tense moment, a bearded man emerged from behind a boulder, rifle still raised. Show us this dispatch. With deliberate movements, Beatrice reached into her saddlebag and extracted an official-looking document. As you can see, 20,000 in gold traveling the eastern route. The man gestured for her to toss it to him. After examining it, his weathered face split into a greedy grin. Boys. Change of plans, he looked back at Beatrice. This better not be a trick, lady. Simply an exchange of information for our lives, she replied calmly. A fair trade, wouldn't you agree? After a brief consultation with his companions, the leader nodded. Get going. You've bought yourselves a pass this time. Yates and Beatrice rode forward cautiously, keeping their weapons ready as they passed the outlaws. Once clear of the canyon, they spurred their horses into a gallop, putting as much distance between themselves and the bandits as possible. When they finally slowed, miles later in a sheltered arroyo, Yates turned to her with barely contained fury. What in hell was that? You just sent those men after an army payroll. Beatrice dismounted calmly, checking her horse for injuries. No, I didn't. I saw the dispatch. You saw a letter from my sister about wedding arrangements folded to look official. Her eyes met his, a glint of satisfaction in them. There is no payroll. By the time those men realize they've been duped, we'll be long gone. Yates stared at her, speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Then, to his own surprise, he started to laugh, a rusty, unpracticed sound that felt foreign in his throat. You, he said when he could speak again, are not what you seem, Beatrice Keller. Few of us are, Mr. Galloway. She smiled, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits beneath vastly different exteriors. They made camp as dusk settled over the landscape, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky. Yates built a small, sheltered fire while Beatrice prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The silence between them had transformed from guarded to companionable. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He asked as they ate. Target competitions were quite popular in Boston after the war, she replied. I discovered I had a natural aptitude. My father encouraged it, said a woman should never be defenseless. And the quick thinking with those outlaws, she hesitated, stirring the remnants of her coffee. Experience teaches adaptation. I've found myself in difficult situations before. Something in her tone suggested deeper waters, but Yates didn't press. Everyone in these territories carried secrets, histories they'd rather leave buried. What about you? She asked. How did Yates Galloway become a man whose mere words make others tremble? He stared into the flames, considering his answer. War changes you. What comes after can change you more. And what came after for you? Worked as a ranch hand, then security for the mining companies. His voice flattened. Found out I had a talent for ending troubles permanently, became a bounty hunter for a while, and now I'm trying to leave that behind. He poked at the fire with a stick. Been saving for a small spread up north, somewhere quiet. A surprising ambition for a man with your reputation. Maybe I'm tired of being what everyone expects me to be. Their eyes met across the fire, understanding passing between them. Beatrice nodded slowly. I believe we all wear masks at times, Mr. Galloway. The difficulty lies in remembering our true faces beneath them. The night deepened around them, the fire casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Yates took first watch, sitting with his back against a boulder, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Beatrice slept nearby, her breathing deep and even. He found himself watching the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, struck by the strange turn his life had taken in just 24 hours. For years, he'd cultivated a persona of hard edges and cold efficiency. His words were weapons, deployed with surgical precision to intimidate or wound. Yet this woman had seen through his carefully constructed facade with unsettling ease, challenging him with laughter rather than fear. More disturbing still was his growing admiration for her, not just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but her quick mind, her courage, her resilience. In a world where he'd trained himself to expect the worst of people, Beatrice Keller represented a complication he hadn't anticipated. The journey to Prescott suddenly seemed both too long and not long enough. Morning came with the harsh cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. They broke camp efficiently, speaking little as they resumed their journey. The landscape changed as they traveled, the sparse desert giving way to juniper and pinyon pine as they gained elevation. By midday, they'd reached a high plateau that offered spectacular views of the valley below. They stopped to rest the horses near a small creek, the water clear and cold from mountain springs. "We're making good time," Yates observed, consulting his pocket watch. "Might reach Wilson's station by nightfall. And from there to Prescott?" Beatrice asked, splashing water on her face. "Another day and a half, weather permitting." He hesitated, then added, "You'll make your sister's wedding." She smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Thank you, it means more than you know." "You're paying me well enough," he reminded her, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Is that truly the only reason you're helping me, Mr. Galloway?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Before he could formulate a response, the crack of a rifle split the air. Yates reacted instinctively, throwing himself toward Beatrice and pulling her down behind a fallen log as bullets splintered bark around them. "The outlaws," she gasped, reaching for her rifle. "Different direction," Yates replied grimly, drawing his Colt. "Someone else entirely." He risked a glance over their cover, spotting movement among the trees on the ridge above them. 3 riders, maybe 4. Their horses were grazing nearby, dangerously exposed. "We need to reach the horses," he said, calculating distances and angles. "I'll provide cover." "When I say run, you make for the creek bed. It'll give you some protection." Beatrice shook her head. "We go together or not at all." "This isn't a debate." "No, it isn't," she interrupted, calmly checking her rifle. "On 3, we both go. 1, 2. Before she could say 3, Yates moved, firing rapidly toward the ridge as they sprinted for the horses. A bullet kicked up dirt at his feet, another whined past his ear. Beatrice reached her mare first, untying it with steady hands despite the danger. Yates was halfway to his gelding when white-hot pain lanced through his left shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled but kept his footing, gritting his teeth against the shock. Suddenly, Beatrice was beside him, firing her rifle one-handed while supporting him with her other arm. "Mount up," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. With her help, he managed to pull himself into the saddle, fighting waves of dizziness. She swung onto her own horse and they galloped down the creek bed, bullets spraying water around them as their attackers gave chase. "There's a ravine ahead," Yates called, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "Too narrow for horses. We'll have to go on foot." They dismounted at the ravine entrance, slapping the horses' flanks to send them running as a diversion. Yates stumbled, the ground tilting beneath him. Beatrice caught his arm, slinging it over her shoulders. "I can manage," he protested weakly. "Of course you can," she replied, guiding him into the shadow of the ravine. "But perhaps just this once you might consider accepting help instead of insisting on doing everything alone." They made their way deeper into the narrow passage, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The ravine twisted and turned, eventually opening into a small box canyon with high walls and a tiny spring bubbling from the rocks. "We'll rest here," Beatrice decided, helping Yates sit with his back against a boulder. "Let me see that wound." He tried to wave her away, but the movement sent fresh pain radiating through his shoulder. Just a graze. A graze that's turned half your shirt crimson, she observed dryly, already unbuttoning his shirt with efficient movements. Hold still. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Still, it bled freely, the edges of the wound angry and raw. You're fortunate, Beatrice said, retrieving a small medical kit from her saddlebag, though fortunate is relative when discussing bullet holes. Despite the pain, Yates found himself almost smiling. You're remarkably calm about this. Panic has never improved any situation. She cleaned the wound with water from the spring and a small flask of whiskey that made Yates hiss through clenched teeth. I volunteered at a field hospital during the latter part of the war. I've seen worse. Thought you were a proper Boston lady. The two aren't mutually exclusive. She began bandaging his shoulder with practiced hands. Being a proper lady doesn't preclude being useful in a crisis. Her face was close to his, intent on her work. Yates noticed the faint dusting of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her mouth, the tendril of auburn hair that had escaped her practical bun to curl against her cheek. "Thank you," he said softly. She glanced up, surprised by his tone. "You're welcome." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before she returned to her task. When she'd finished binding the wound, she sat back on her heels, studying his face. "You've lost blood, but not dangerously so. You should rest while I keep watch." "Who were they?" he asked, fighting against the weariness seeping into his bones. Beatrice's expression grew troubled. "I have a theory, but you should rest first. We'll discuss it when you're stronger." Despite his intention to argue, exhaustion overtook him. He drifted into an uneasy sleep, vaguely aware of Beatrice moving quietly around their small sanctuary, securing their position. When he awoke, shadows had lengthened across the canyon floor. The pain in his shoulder had settled to a persistent throb, manageable if he didn't move suddenly. Beatrice sat nearby, her rifle across her lap, alert to any sound from beyond their haven. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice rough. "A few hours." She offered him water, which he accepted gratefully. "No sign of pursuit, but I think we should wait until full dark before moving on." Yates nodded, leaning back against the rock. "Now tell me who they were," Beatrice sighed, setting aside her rifle. "I believe they may have been sent by Carlton Embry, the railroad magnate. What would he want with us?" "With you, nothing. With me." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "My journey to my sister's wedding isn't entirely familial in nature. I'm also carrying documents evidence of Embry's bribery of territorial officials to secure land rights that rightfully belong to the local ranchers and indigenous communities." Yates stared at her. "You're what?" "My brother-in-law works as a clerk in the land office. He discovered the corruption but feared coming forward himself. Embry has already arranged accidents for others who opposed him." She met Yates's gaze steadily. "The documents are sewn into the lining of my traveling case. Once delivered to the federal marshal in Prescott, they should be sufficient to halt Embry's land grab and possibly indict him. And the wedding is also real. I wouldn't lie about that." A small smile touched her lips. "I simply combined two journeys into one." Yates ran a hand through his hair, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "So I've been escorting not just a woman to a wedding, but evidence in a federal case against one of the most powerful men in the territory." "Yes." "I apologize for the deception, but I couldn't risk telling you earlier. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone would be." She looked away. "I understand if you're angry." He should have been furious. She'd placed them both in mortal danger without his knowledge or consent. And yet, looking at her now, this complex, courageous woman who laughed in the face of danger and bound wounds with steady hands, he found anger impossible to summon. "Why you?" he asked instead. "Why not send a marshal or an agent?" "Because no one would suspect a woman traveling to her sister's wedding." She shrugged. "I volunteered. It seemed important, worth the risk. Your sister knows. Elizabeth knows everything. Her husband Arthur gathered the evidence. The wedding provided perfect cover for the exchange." Yates shook his head, amazed at the layers of this woman he'd initially dismissed as just another Eastern traveler out of her depth. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy person I've ever met." Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted. Does this change your willingness to continue our journey? He should say yes. The sensible thing would be to part ways now, to extricate himself from a situation that had become infinitely more dangerous than a simple escort job. $300 wasn't worth dying for. But looking at Beatrice's face in the fading light, determined, hopeful, unwavering in her conviction, he found himself saying, "We'll leave at nightfall. There's a back trail through the mountains. Longer route, but safer." Relief and something warmer flickered in her eyes. "Thank you, Yates." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The sound of it in her voice stirred something he'd thought long buried, a capacity for connection he'd deliberately atrophied over years of solitude. As darkness fell, they prepared to move out. Yates's wound made mounting difficult, but he managed with Beatrice's assistance. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, providing just enough light to navigate the treacherous mountain path. They rode in companionable silence, alert for any sign of pursuit. Occasionally, their legs would brush as the narrow trail forced their horses close together, each contact sending an awareness through Yates that had nothing to do with his injury. "Tell me about your sister," he said eventually, as much to distract himself from these feelings as from the pain in his shoulder. Beatrice's voice softened with affection. "Elizabeth is 2 years younger than me, but always seemed older somehow, more serious, more practical. When our mother died, she took over running the household at 16. She's the steady one while I've always been." "She hesitated, the one who laughs when she should cry," Yates suggested. "Precisely." She smiled in the darkness. "Elizabeth fell in love with Arthur when he came to repair our father's chronometer. He was so different from the Boston men we knew, straightforward, passionate about his work, uninterested in social climbing. When he was offered the position in Prescott, she didn't hesitate to follow him west. And you stayed behind." "I had responsibilities. Our father's health was failing. After he passed last winter, there was nothing keeping me in Boston." She adjusted her hat. "This journey is a beginning, perhaps. I'm not certain of what." "Few beginnings come with complete certainty," Yates observed. "That's what makes them beginnings." Beatrice glanced at him, surprised. "That's rather philosophical for a man who claims to see no point in talking. Maybe you're rubbing off on me." Their eyes met in the starlight, an unspoken current passing between them. Beatrice looked away first, focusing on the trail ahead, but Yates caught the slight curve of her lips, the faint color in her cheeks. They traveled through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. Dawn found them descending from the mountains toward a broad valley where Wilson's station, little more than a trading post and way station for travelers, sat beside a dusty road. "We should be safe here," Yates said as they approached. "Embry's men won't risk anything too public." Wilson's station proved to be a weathered collection of buildings surrounding a central well. A few freight wagons were parked nearby, their drivers finishing breakfast before continuing their journeys. The station keeper, a grizzled man named Silas, raised an eyebrow at Yates's bandaged shoulder but asked no questions as he showed them to a small room where they could rest. "Stage to Prescott leaves tomorrow morning," he informed them. "Only sure way across the wash after those rains." Beatrice nodded her thanks, then turned to Yates once they were alone. "You should have that wound properly cleaned and dressed." "It's fine," he insisted, though the pain had intensified during their night ride. "It isn't, and you know it." She pushed him gently toward the room's single chair. "Sit, I'll fetch hot water and fresh bandages." Too exhausted to argue, Yates complied. The room was spare but clean, a narrow bed, the chair, a small table with a basin. Through the single window, he could see the station yard where travelers came and went, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. When Beatrice returned with supplies, she worked in silence, removing the old bandage and cleaning the wound with gentle but thorough movements. Yates watched her face as she concentrated, struck by how quickly this woman had come to matter to him. In just 2 days, she'd challenged everything he thought he knew about himself, about the walls he'd built around his heart. "There," she said finally, securing the fresh bandage. That should the door burst open, revealing 3 men with guns drawn. Yates reached for his holster but froze as he recognized the center figure, Carlton Embry himself. impeccably dressed despite the frontier setting, his patrician features set in cold determination. "Miss Keller," Embry said smoothly, "how fortunate to find you before you reached Prescott. You have something that belongs to me." Beatrice straightened, positioning herself slightly in front of Yates. "I have nothing of yours, Mr. Embry. The documents, Miss Keller." "Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending ignorance." Embry gestured to his men. "Search her belongings." As one of the men moved toward Beatrice's traveling case, Yates tensed, calculating his odds despite his injured shoulder. Before he could act, the station keeper appeared in the doorway behind Embry, shotgun raised. "This is my establishment," Silas said evenly, "and I don't recall inviting you gentlemen in." Embry turned, his expression contemptuous. "This doesn't concern you, old man. When armed men burst into my rooms, it concerns me plenty." Silas cocked the shotgun meaningfully. "Now, you boys can leave peaceful-like, or you can leave with a belly full of buckshot. Your choice." A tense silence followed, broken only when the distant sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Through the window, Yates could see a group of riders approaching, men wearing the distinctive badges of U.S. Marshals. "Seems like your timing's off, Embry," Yates observed, a cold smile forming. "Marshals don't generally take kindly to men holding women at gunpoint." Fury flashed across Embry's face, quickly masked. With a curt nod to his men, he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over, Miss Keller." "I believe it is," she replied steadily. "Those marshals aren't here by coincidence. I sent a telegraph from our last stop, informing them of my arrival and the evidence I carry." Embry's face went white with rage, but with the marshals dismounting outside, he had no choice but to retreat. As he reached the door, he turned back, his gaze fixing on Yates. "You've chosen the wrong side, Galloway. Your reputation won't protect you from me." Yates met his stare evenly. "Threatening a man who kills for a living seems unwise, even for you." After Embry and his men had been taken into custody by the marshals, explanations given and statements taken, Yates and Beatrice found themselves alone again in the small room, the excitement of the day giving way to exhaustion. "You sent a telegraph?" Yates asked, sinking onto the bed. "When?" "Before we left Rattlesnake Ridge. I arranged for it to be delayed, sent only if we didn't reach certain checkpoints on schedule." She sat beside him, suddenly looking as tired as he felt. "I had contingency plans." "Of course you did." He shook his head, a reluctant smile forming. "You're something else, Beatrice Keller." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Thank you, Yates, not just for the escort, but for believing in me when you learned the truth, for standing with me against Embry." "Wasn't much standing, more sitting wounded while you handled everything." "That's not how I remember it." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "I remember a man who put aside his own safety for mine, who was willing to fight despite his injury." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through him, more healing than any medicine. "I'm not the man you think I am, Beatrice. I've done things. We've all done things," she interrupted gently. "What matters is who we choose to be now, today." In her eyes, he saw not judgment but understanding and something more, something that made his heart beat faster despite his exhaustion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "I think," he said softly, "that I'm choosing to be a man who believes in new beginnings." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That's fortunate, because I'm choosing to be a woman who takes chances on sharp-tongued cowboys with unexpected depths." Their lips met in a kiss that felt both inevitable and surprising gentle at first, then deepening as they surrendered to feelings neither had expected to find on this journey. When they finally parted, Yates kept her close, unwilling to break the connection. "Your sister's wedding is tomorrow," he reminded her. "Yes, and you're accompanying me," she replied, as if it were already decided. "Elizabeth will want to meet the man who helped deliver both her sister and the evidence that will protect their community." "And after," Beatrice's eyes sparkled with the laughter he'd come to treasure. "After, Mr. Galloway, I believe you mentioned something about a small spread up north." "Somewhere quiet." "I did, though I should warn you, it's just a dream at this point. Some dreams are worth pursuing." She kissed him again, briefly but with promise. "Especially when shared." As evening settled over Wilson's station, Yates Galloway found himself facing a future suddenly rich with possibilities he'd never dared imagine. His shoulder ached and danger still lurked, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, awakened by a woman whose laughter had cracked the armor around his heart as surely as any bullet could pierce flesh. Tomorrow they would reach Prescott, deliver the evidence, attend a wedding. The day after would bring new challenges, new adventures. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to hold Beatrice close and marvel at how a journey taken for money had ended in something far more precious: the discovery that even for a man who spoke sharp as Spurs, there could be healing in a woman's laughter and redemption in her love. The man whose words had once cut like knives found himself using them instead to whisper tenderness against Beatrice's hair as night deepened around them, promising with each breath a future neither had expected but both now embraced together.